April 12, 1981, in Keddie, California, the Sharp family and some friends went to sleep in Cabin 28 in the Keddie Resort Lodge. What occurred next would shock the county and is a crime that is still actively being worked on today. 4 people sleeping in the house were brutally murdered. As mentioned before, 4 people were killed in Keddie, 3 of which were found dead inside Cabin 28. Their bodies were found by Sheila Sharp, who, unlike the rest of her family, had slept at a friend's cabin next door. Sheila found the bodies of her mother, Sue Sharp, her 15-year-old brother, Johnny Sharp, and Johnny's 17-year-old friend, Dana Wingate. Sheila's 12-year-old sister, Tina, was missing from the scene, but her remains would be found at a different time, a fact that we'll touch on later. 2 younger brothers, Greg, age 5, and Rick, age 10, were found in the cabin, in a bedroom, asleep and safe. In the same room, also found asleep and safe, was the boy's friend, Justin Smart. When you look at the scene of the crime, it's tough to fathom how they could have slept through such a tragedy. Johnny, Dana, and Sue were all bound to some degree by electrical wiring. These weapons were found at the scene. A bent steak knife found on the floor, a bloodied butcher knife and claw hammer, both found on a small wooden table near the entryway to the kitchen. Blood splatters were found on the walls and ceiling, suggesting the kind of force used. Here's some background on Sue Sharp and her children. Sue Sharp had left a broken and abusive marriage and was described as a quiet woman who loved her kids. In 1980, Sue moved her kids to the Keddie area, where they lived in relative poverty. Let's return to the body of Tina Sharp, the one Sharp sibling missing from the cabin. Tina's skull would eventually be found due to an anonymous tip called into the police on the 3rd anniversary of the murders. The skull was found about 50 miles away in a whole other county. Aside from the timing, which is undoubtedly suspicious, what's truly dubious is the fact that the caller identified the skull as Tina's. But how could the caller have known that based on the skull alone? Go over the suspects, of which there were really only 2 examined by the police at the time. Marty Smart and his roommate, Bobo Betty, who lived 2 cabins down from the Sharps. Let's go over a possible motive. Marty Smart was married to Marilyn Smart, the mother of Justin Smart, who was one of the kids that was found alive and well in the cabin. Marty was reportedly an abusive husband, and there are reports that Sue Sharp had been counseling Marilyn on her marriage. When finding out about Sue's interference with his marriage, Marty reportedly went ballistic about it. Marty reportedly left for Reno, Nevada soon after the murders. Law enforcement at the time felt that the killer was, quote, more than one person, end quote, hence them throwing Marty's roommate Bo, who was an ex-con, into the case as an accomplice. Despite there being much more to this case, at the time, the investigation strangely stopped there. There was evidence that seemingly went unnoticed, and people of interest that may have not been vetted properly. The father of Dana Wingate, the friend of the Sharps that was also killed, said in 2001 that the police had, quote, stumbled over each other and fouled up the case, and he isn't alone in that line of thinking, as many suspect the police on the case may have been involved in a cover-up. Former Sheriff Doug Thomas, who was sheriff at the time of the murder, is accused of a cover-up in many online theories, which allege that he was a close friend to Marty Smart at the time. Sheriff Thomas did say that he gave one session of advice to the Smart couple, which took place before the murders. However, Marilyn Smart does not recall the meeting with her husband Marty and the sheriff, but said that the two were not friends to her knowledge, though some consider Marilyn Smart a conspirator as well. In 2013, the case was reopened by current Sheriff Greg Hagwood and Mike Gamberg, both of whom had personal connections to the victims of the case. Here's what Sheriff Hagwood had to say about the police cover-up theory. Quote, "It has brought to light some amazing timelines, histories, and what some may call coincidence. Others may look at it more accusingly. I don't put anything outside the realm of possibility. Let's go over some interesting new developments brought on by the reopening of the case. The first development happened when Gamberg organized boxes of case reports and evidence from the case that had been shoved aside. What he found was a letter written by Marty Smart to his wife Marilyn, reportedly written soon after the murders. It reads, quote, "I've paid the price for your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through? Great. What else do you want?" Second development was something also found in those boxes of case files. Gamberg found the taped anonymous phone call that tipped off the location of the remains of Tina Sharp. The audio of that 911 call is now being compared with audio of suspects looking for a match, though it's worth mentioning that the tape was never voice analyzed at the time. Here's current investigator Sheriff Hagwood on that tape. Quote, "Why that sat in a sealed evidence envelope never opened, I don't have the answer to that, but we have it now," end quote. The third development came from Gamberg speaking to Marty Smart's former therapist in Reno, Nevada. Apparently, Marty had confessed to the murders in a session. The therapist reportedly told Gamberg that even he was surprised that the investigators at the time of the murders hadn't used that confession against Marty. The fourth development was the discovery that a man had found a steel blue-handled claw hammer using a metal detector near a pond near Keddie. The hammer matched the description of one that Marty had told investigators he'd lost. As of late November 2016, it was being tested for DNA or blood residue as a possible additional murder weapon. In regards to the killers being Marty Smart and Bobo Betty, Hagwood said this, quote, "It's a theory that we are working, to the degree possible, to conclude or dismiss. There's a disproportionate amount of evidence and information that tends to point in that direction," end quote. As of now, nobody has been charged, though you can rest easy knowing that Hagwood and Gamberg continue to dig deeper on what really happened that one night in Cabin 28. Here's one final thought from Sheriff Hagwood. Quote, "There is not an expiration date on homicides, and to the extent that we have surviving siblings and family members, it is our fundamental obligation to them to understand who did this and why," end quote. Sheila Sharp, one of the surviving members of the Sharp family, said this of Hagwood, quote, "Finally, I have somebody who cares. In the last 3 years, he's done more than the Plumas County Sheriff's Office has done in the previous 32 years. Personally believes that the murders of her family were carried out by Marty Smart, and Bobo will finally confirm those suspicions. But for now, the devastating case of the Keddie Cabin murders remains unsolved."